You all, good day, those who are joining us online. Thank you for joining us for today's seminar, which is going to focus on the cost and affordability of healthy diets, adoption and the use of new food security metric worldwide. As part of this Tsujimoto Perspectives in Global Development, we bring you scholars from around the world. And just to remind you again, this seminar is offered in both fall and spring semesters. So for those who are taking it for credit, this is a course that you can take in both semesters. I also wanted to remind you that there are people who can attend this via Zoom, so feel free to share this with your friends, your family members, not just people at Cornell University. And by the way, the seminars are recorded and they're going to be shared online. There's a dedicated YouTube channel for global development where you can go back and see the different seminars that have been showcased. So I also want to make a special thank you to Mira Shekhar Family Fund for supporting today's session in the hopes of elevating awareness to the critical role of that finance plays in the ability to successfully scale up nutrition solutions, especially in the developing world. And Mira, she's actually part of the audience today. Thank you very much for sponsoring the seminar today. We really appreciate this. Every semester we do have somebody speak on this very particular important topic. Now, it is my honor and pleasure. Usually we have this in person, but for some reason we just could not make it work. So, this today is going to be on Zoom, but usually this is held in person as well. With that, it's my special honor and privilege to introduce our speaker today, Professor Will Masters. And maybe Will, at the risk of embarrassing both you and me, I first knew about you in 1991 at the University of Zimbabwe, where I was an undergraduate student, and your name was on a door somewhere. I think you'd just done your PhD research work in Zimbabwe. And for most of the audience in the room, that sounds very prehistoric. Early 90s is way before they were born. So Will Masters is a professor of food policy and economics at Tufts University. He's a co-author of a very popular textbook in food economics entitled Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health. And since 2020, he has led this very important initiative called Food Prices for Nutrition, a project that introduced new metrics for the cost and affordability of healthy diets. He's an elected fellow for the Agriculture and Applied Economics Association in the American Society for Nutrition. He has won many accolades, but with that, please let's help me welcome our speaker today.
Thank you, Ed.
And Will, you can take over.
Yes, thanks so much to Ed and to Mira for organizing. And to Mira, being online, it's really wonderful that you're able to join yourself. I see others online and look forward to talking with the group in the room. I'm not there in person just because of scheduling reasons, but I do want to flag that this is, a low carbon opportunity for academic life to proceed with this kind of discussion without the enormous carbon footprint of travel. In order to talk about something that's been very central to my life, and I think to quite a few people around the world, this idea that we can measure the cost and affordability of healthy diets as part of a larger agenda in food economics that has this subtitle, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health, linking farm production to human nutritional requirements in a new way. So having these metrics that we're going to talk about today have really changed the way people can talk about.
Okay. Will, if you don't mind speaking just a little bit louder or getting closer to the mic, but I think people can hear you all right.
Okay, a little louder like that. Is that working?
Good.
Okay, so the idea of measuring the cost of a healthy diet and using that to measure whether people can afford that level of diet quality has allowed people to write and talk about these questions of food access in a dramatically enhanced way. And you can see that in these n-grams, which is the frequency of phrases that are n, meaning n is 4 words here or 5 words here, as a share of all the 4 or 5 word phrases in all the English language books and documents that Google has digitized. You can see that these are things that people talked about a little bit in the 2010s, but it was only after we were able to measure using these metrics that we'll talk about in 2018, and then the FAO and World Bank began global monitoring in 2020, and it really took off as a topic and began to be used by national governments in 2023, 24, and that led this year to this global prize. This is the King of Sweden. You can tell by his medals, awarding this prize in global food security that the Swedish Royal Academy for Agriculture awards every few years. So this is something that involved many research studies, so more than 30 peer-reviewed articles. You can see how they evolved. So the first pilot study in just 2 countries was in AJAE in 2018, the first partnership with the World Bank in global food security 2019, the first causal study in Science Advances, really understanding ecosystem performance in a biophysical as well as a economic sense in a general science journal. And then in food policy, in the Lancet, using all countries' prices, validations in 2024, 2022, and 2025. The key was for policy adoption, getting this into UN agency and World Bank reports. So the state of food security and nutrition in the world, first in 2020, then the same method in 2021. Then in 2022, we introduced a new improvement that I'll talk about, and the most recent data is for 2024. And you can see, and I'll talk in a moment about, how these data played out. You can just download the data from either the FAO or published simultaneously on the same day by the World Bank in their data bank. The World Bank calls it Food Prices for Nutrition because that's the original project that paid for this. The FAO likes different acronyms, so they call it COAHD, Cost and Affordability of Healthy Diet. And you can see that other dashboards like Our World in Data are able to just download this and do their own data visualization. So the Food Systems Dashboard, many others do the same. One key aspect of the project has been tireless work with partners in countries, typically led by my co-director for this project, Anna Herforth, who is a Cornell graduate, a PhD from nutrition. You can see her here leading workshops that she has done in a wide range of countries, such that when these government agencies are announcing the data, these are national statistics from a government agency using their own data. And that's the key hallmark of this work. What are we doing? What's the purpose of this? It's that prior price indexes did not have information about the health attributes of food. So any consumer price index, to think about foods for health, just about food spending, that's a consumer price index that uses all foods weighted by actual expenditure. So soda and potato chips have the same weight as by spending, and broccoli or spinach has a small weight because people don't buy very much of it. Global food price indexes or producer prices, they're about bulk commodities, not retail items. So to get at access at the retail level for people in a village where the market might meet once a week, and you would go and you would see, can you buy mangoes, bananas, amaranth leaves, whatever in your local setting from local village markets, or in a city, a town, Accra, whatever, across around the world, what is available matched to health information. Of course, there's food security metrics that use the mix of foods actually consumed. That's undernourishment for the prevalence of hunger. As you might know, that's a method that uses food balance sheet data and assumes that those calories are distributed log normally and that people have a fixed energy requirement. And based on that idea, which was introduced by a great Indian statistician named P.V. Sukhatme in the year I was born, 1961, and FAO ultimately did the measure in 74, that shows less than 10% now undernourished in this sense. In 95, Cornell, Kathy Radimer, in her PhD, developed a experience of food insecurity scale that I hope you all know about. It's a signature contribution of Cornell. asking, did people go to bed hungry, skip meals, eat less, or eat differently due to lack of money or other resources to buy their usual diet? And now it's about a quarter of the world, 2 billion people, that are food insecure in this sense. And what we do with this new metric is to track access and affordability in terms of the lowest cost, locally available items. When you go to the market, what are the least expensive? That's the innovation here. The least expensive options. In mango season, it's mangoes, and then later it might be citrus, and then later something else. Depending on the location in each food group, what are the least expensive options? And doing that in real terms. So dollars per day, adjusting for inflation, adjusting for the value of money and the purchasing power of money. Since 2020, the World Bank FAO using this as a global food security metric, and then governments using it as a national indicator, that reveals about a third of the world cannot afford a healthy diet in this sense. So what you're seeing is increasingly high level, ambitious goals, right? Aiming higher to a greater standard of nutritional well-being that is now for the first time matching items to food composition and matching food composition to human nutritional needs for lifelong health. This is a diagnostic metric. It tells us what to do about malnutrition by distinguishing among 3 causes of unhealthy diets. So one possibility is that prices are unusually high, or healthy foods are just not even available. They're infinitely expensive, in which case you need to invest in supply to get production and distribution costs down so that the price becomes lower. Or perhaps the price is already low, but incomes are even lower than that, in which case people need higher earnings or nutrition assistance, some kind of social safety net. But there's a third possibility, which is that prices are low and incomes are sufficient, but people go to the marketplace and buy something else instead. That these low-cost healthy items are in fact available and affordable, but displaced by other options due to some factors such as what things taste like, the convenience and time use of cooking, the aspirations that are shaped by marketing, and all the reasons why people eat something other than these low-cost healthy items. How do we define a healthy diet? The process that Anna Herforth led through the workshops that I described and the literature reviews that she has been leading around nutrition from her PhD at Cornell in international nutrition, recognizes that national governments have defined a healthy diet using this kind of dietary guideline. These are food guides showing plate shares by food group. It might be 6 or 8, sometimes 5, sometimes 10 different food groups arrayed on a plate in terms of the shares. And in order to compute these least cost healthy diets in each market location, we have now computed millions and millions of diets. That's only possible to do because we convert volume and weight of an item as purchased, for example, a basket of tomatoes or a bunch of green leafy vegetable, we convert that to the calories, the amount of vegetable that would be needed in each of the dietary guidelines. So quantities have to be converted because water weight differs a lot and volume in air differs a lot. We convert it to how much vegetable is in the vegetable, how much fruit is in the fruit using energy shares. And that was done based on the median cost of 10 quantified guidelines, the 10 that you see here, because it's politically representative of all UN regions. And then for SOFI 2022, we introduced this dietary standard, which is the current standard used for global monitoring. So this is 6 food groups with a total of 11 items that adds up to 2,330 calories with an energy share that's about half starchy staples, a little bit of vegetables, but it's of course a large plate share. It's just few calories because you don't eat vegetables for the calories, you eat vegetables for the vegetables, and the same with fruits and so forth. We updated the price and income data using continuous innovation with these new papers that attempted to improve the method. And then through these country workshops, getting the national partners interested in publishing their local statistics for variation by month and within countries. Now, Malawi uses the Healthy Diet Basket for their national cost of a healthy diet, as well as Nigeria, but these other countries use their own dietary guidelines, and the same method is applied, but with their own dietary guidelines that might look like this. So each country's dietary guidelines can include some specific recommendations. This particular healthy diet basket is, by definition, the lowest common denominator, a kind of commonality among the dietary guidelines that establishes a lower benchmark, a lower bound on what a healthy diet is defined to be by national experts in stock-taking exercises among their university community, their scientists deciding what is a healthy diet in their country. Now, when we use the least expensive options, we are defining the healthy diet basket in terms of dietary energy from each of the food groups here. But you can see that that gives a very different proportion in terms of grams or weight and in terms of cost or budget share. For example, vegetables are a very small share of the dietary energy, but a large share of the weight and also a large share of the average cost. Now, when you look at different locations based on agroecology or market conditions, the opportunities to trade with other countries or with other regions of a country, you obtain these least expensive items, these 11 items in 6 food groups, using the local price data, showing what's available at each market location. In a rural market, might meet once a week, what's the price of the item, and then averaging up over a region of a country, you get different answers. So remember, there's 11 items in 6 food groups. Here's the example for Pakistan. On average, this happens to be data for 2017, just to show you some older data. The least expensive animal source foods happen to be buffalo milk and live chicken. That's the way the Pakistan food system worked in 2017. Wheat, flour, and maize, the least expensive starchy staples. Bananas and coconut, least expensive fruits, etc. Go over to West Africa, you get a very different mix of animal source foods, sardines and small fish, and very different fruits. And you can see why that would be. In contrast, the vegetables turn out to be pretty similar around the world. This is a core discovery about food access, and in particular, access to an overall healthy diet, is which items turn out to be the most cost-effective per unit of each food group. When you go to high-income countries, you get a very different mix of items that are least expensive. In particular, dairy becomes very inexpensive. This is Italy, the home of Parmalat, boxed milk, right? They basically first commercialized that. It's really inexpensive in Italy, at least in 2017. And milk is also very inexpensive in the US. Bananas and apples tend to be among the least expensive in all kinds of high-income countries. This, of course, is a very low standard of diet quality. This is only $3.23 a day in 2017. In contrast, something like the USDA Thrifty Food Plan, which is what guides SNAP benefits, that's quite a bit more expensive, right? More than twice as expensive. And that's because the Thrifty Food Plan says, oh, you need actual meat. And furthermore, you need several kinds of meat in order to be even a low-income person in America. You can't just have rice and spaghetti. You need actual breakfast cereal, for example, for breakfast. You can't use dried beans to be a low-income person in America. You would have to have canned beans prepared already. And you'd need nicer vegetables than these. So you end up with a higher cost to meet the US standards. This is a global, very low-cost standard. So what's our discovery is that the cost of this is about $3 to $4 a day, this red dot here proportional to the population. Similarly, in poor countries and rich countries, while the actual food spending of the populations is much lower than this cost of a healthy diet in the poor countries. This is national income per person on a log scale. And in the rich countries, it's much more. And this, for the first time, reveals that poor people are not having unhealthy diets in the low-income countries because they have the wrong idea. It's not because they don't understand what a healthy diet would be that they can't afford. It's that they cannot afford. It's just too expensive. In contrast, for the first time, we've shown that in rich countries, these items would be available. You can go to the store and buy them, but it's no one's idea of a good time. This is not something you would want to bring home to your children. It's not something that your spouse would say, oh, honey, that's great. This is what's for dinner. It would be a very disappointing day indeed if you went home and this was your dinner day after day. And so people obviously spend more and regrettably at these cost levels aren't even getting a healthy diet, which is because of displacement, not because of high prices or low incomes. So for affordability, the FAO does this comparison to household income. The method is very straightforward, relying on the politically acceptable definition of the word poverty through the national government agencies that manage national statistics about poverty using poverty lines and thresholds established by their parliament or legislature and then implemented by their national statistical agency. In the US, it happens to be the Bureau of Labor Statistics that does this, but in every country, it's a different statistical agency. They establish poverty lines. So in low-income countries, the average is roughly 215. Now it's up to 3, but this is reporting the original method from 2024. As I mentioned at the beginning, when we worked with the FAO and the World Bank to get this accepted as a political agreement, we are using the data you're seeing here. Then you multiply this poverty line times the non-food spending that low-income people have in order to understand how much housing, how much clothing, how much education or healthcare should they spend. It's actually a very small amount of basic non-food spending in the low-income countries and a much higher amount in the high-income countries. So this reveals what is left over for food. We then compare that to the cost of the healthy diet that you just saw on the previous slide. And that shows you this result, that about a third or 2.6 billion of the world's people have that income remaining after non-food spending that's insufficient, so they cannot afford that $3 to $4 level of the healthy diet cost. This is a darker shade to show a larger share of the population in Africa, but a larger circle to show the large numbers in Asia. And this is a familiar pattern corresponding to other kinds of well-being metrics. But in this case, we have a well-being metric that's specific to foods for health that is usable by the health community to think about targeting assistance for either lower cost or higher income or avoiding displacement, as I discussed. So it's a diagnostic metric to permit intervention. And this reveals these clear differences by region, where, as I hope you appreciate from this course, from Ed's work in leading the course to sort of have all the topics laid out, it's clear that sub-Saharan Africa is the region of the world where population is still growing, in particular rural population. And because acreage per person is shrinking as rural population grows, it's becoming more and more impoverished over time and harder for them to acquire a healthy diet. In contrast, South Asia and East Asia have flat or declining number of rural people, increasing rural land area per farm household, and therefore lifting out of poverty as farmers can acquire more and more land and makes it easier to afford a healthy diet. Now, this is not what people actually eat. So this paper shows you, relative to the healthy diet benchmark, which is the black dashed lines that are aligned here, how much people in each region, on average, are using for food of each major food group. So North America, in the light blue, we use less than the healthy diet basket of starchy staples. We increased our starchy staples a lot in the 1980s and 90s low-fat craze. We then stopped that increase towards low-fat diets at this time, but that led to a higher level of starchy staple consumption. Meanwhile, our animal source food kept rising, our oils and fats kept rising, except for this brief period of the low-fat craze when our oil and fat consumption did not rise. And these two food groups, plus the discretionary, which is basically sugar, are overshooting way above the healthy diet basket target. That's the horizontal black dashed line, meaning that these foods are displacing fruits, vegetables, and legumes, nuts, and seeds, which would be the healthier alternatives if we could persuade ourselves when we go to the grocery store and when we prepare dinner to forego some of this, which is so delicious, so compelling, often advertised, and it smells great when it's frying, and it tastes great when you're eating it. You just regret it, later on, regarding cardiovascular disease and so forth for these foods, and regarding diabetes and weight gain for these foods. So for policy change, we need timely access to useful data. The whole point of the project has been to develop software tools for agency staff to run on their own computers. And Benga Sadiq, who's in the audience now, and Christina Sokorenko, PhD student currently at Cornell, worked on this in order to help governments do this. You can see a paper that Christina co-authored here, and that's joint with government officials who are using these data in their own country context on their own software. So in Nigeria, for example, you can see how the location-specific items that can help guide intervention, they're specific to Nigeria, right? They're not like the global monitoring data that comes from World Bank data. These come from their own national local data, and they're much more timely. And they get picked up in the local media and used in policy debates, such as their minimum wage debate or agricultural policy interventions to produce these particular value chains. Technical assistance is now shifting from this academic home where we incubated it at Tufts University, incubated the methods. Now it's regularized. It's just a routine part of UN monitoring. So FAO is being funded by the Gates Foundation to take over this technical assistance task. And at Tufts, we'll continue to work on research about it. So Anna Herforth, who led the development of the diet quality standard, this healthy diet basket, and the uptake by national governments, she is now a senior advisor at FAO leading this, while I continue to do the methods development and so forth at Tufts. And people at Cornell who are interested in this, we are absolutely keen to collaborate on the possibility of research studies, wherever in the world you might be working. So it's a diagnostic metric. You might find that prices are unusually high. That's a food production distribution issue. You might find that prices are low, but incomes are even lower. That's an employment safety net issue. You might find that prices are low, incomes are sufficient, but items are displaced by other options. That's a convenience or information or marketing issue. And the key insight is that in any case, the target is an overall balanced diet with sufficient room in the diet for the vegetables and fruits that would protect against chronic disease later in life, the starchy staples for low-cost energy, the animal source foods you would need for micronutrient bioavailability and absorption, and then enough fiber and probiotic food components for gut health. That would include the legumes, nuts, and seeds, and also fruits and vegetables, and then oils and fats for taste and for sufficient lipids for metabolism. And that idea that there's no one healthy food you need. Instead, you need this overall healthy diet that if it's displaced by too much soda and chips or too much fried chicken, you're going to end up with too little of something else that you would need for a balanced diet. One closing insight is that within each food group, these low-cost items that determine access to a healthy diet are not only more affordable, they also have less emissions. Now, this is usually true. It's not, of course, 100% always true, but they usually have less emissions. This is work, a dissertation from Elena Martinez, who along the x-axis here, you see the cost of each item. Along the y-axis, you see the emissions in CO2 equivalent. That's a lot of methane from milk or beef because of enteric fermentation in the gut with the burps of methane that are produced from ruminant digestion of beef or dairy. But then there's also from starchy staples, from rice, there's methane emissions from paddy rice. And then there's emissions from land use change and fossil fuel use, all of which means that animal source foods generally have just much higher emissions than any other category of food, except the most emitting vegetables that are up here. And because these involve greenhouses and other high energy using ways of making vegetables. But the most important insight from this picture is that within animal source foods, within vegetables, and to a considerable extent in starchy staples or other food groups, the less expensive option is less emitting. It is more sustainable to have a lower cost choice. If you go to the grocery store and you're choosing among animal source foods, choose the cheapest one per calorie or 100 calories of food, because that will use less resources and therefore have less emissions. And this is a mind-blowing result. It's just really surprising to a lot of people. The link is closer to emissions than to water, but it's also true that a lower cost item uses less water. Why? Because it just uses less of everything. That's why it's lower cost. But it's not within the food group healthier or less healthy. A less expensive item might be less healthy, might be more healthy, but there's no systematic pattern. You would have to read the label to know about nutritional profile. In contrast, you can just use price as a guide to sustainability because price captures the amount of resources in something, but it does not capture the amount of nutritional value, because nutritional value is sometimes healthy in a cheaper product and sometimes healthier in a less expensive product. In summary, what do? We combine available data in new ways. So food item availability and prices, food composition based on item identification. Food item data comes from ICP, International Comparison Program for global monitoring, and from Consumer Price Index data for national statistics, or sometimes market information and other sources. And if you're interested in this, there's lots of room for Cornell people to do research that would investigate price data. Is it really capturing what people can obtain? What's the cost of home production? What's the cost of esoteric items that are sometimes available in the market, such as bambara nuts or something like that that's relatively unusual and might not be in a given data set? Then matching the item description to its food composition, that's something we have to do manually. And then you go and check, like, do people agree that this item description is really this food? How big a bunch of amaranth leaves? And are the amaranth leaves this kind of amaranth leaves or that kind of amaranth leaves? So there's an enormous amount of food science research here to be sure you understand and are accurate about what items are actually being sold in the market and what is their nutritional composition. Then on the diet quality standards, there are lots of people at Cornell who could contribute to thinking about either nutrient adequacy, sufficient vitamins and minerals, or health risks posed by other attributes of food, such as fiber and the different kinds of fiber, different kinds of fatty acids, different kinds of phytochemicals and probiotics and other aspects of the diet. So we currently have this global diet standard called the Healthy Diet Basket. It's the lowest common denominator of dietary guidelines, and you might want to work on higher or different diet standards. And finally, comparing to actual spending and actual diets is a whole agenda with just endless opportunities to think about the work. So in conclusion, we have a new kind of metric that within your time as undergraduates or graduate students, and within recent the past 5 years, has suddenly become available to researchers as a methodological toolkit, the software tools that I showed you, and the results of that. It reveals that about a third, or 2.6 billion of the world's people, simply cannot afford a healthy diet because those nutrient-rich food groups that have a larger share of the budget to meet a healthy diet standard than the cost of other foods, those are simply expensive to grow. It's harder to make fruits and vegetables than cassava or plantains or maize. It's also harder to store and ship them. So starchy staples, vegetable oil, and sugar have about the same cost per calorie because they're just calories. And so the photosynthesis to make them, and they're shelf stable and so forth. So the shipping cost and storage cost is lowest. And that's not by accident. These evolved precisely because they're hyper efficient in photosynthesis and per calorie, and therefore provide the basic energy that made humanity survive for tens of thousands of years, but of course survive with low life expectancy because we didn't, other diseases would get you before malnutrition did. But now that we've conquered the other diseases, these health-related nutritional problems are the principal modifiable risk factors for so many later in life health conditions. Now, unaffordability for these valuable, expensive fruits, vegetables, and animal source foods is because people just don't have enough income. Healthier diets just require some nutrition assistance. Even if they're affordable, however, there's displacement. And this displacement happens even in low-income settings among people who cannot afford a healthy diet. They're still substituting some more expensive, unhealthy options because those more expensive, unhealthy options are just so compelling in terms of taste or time use and convenience or aspirations shaped by marketing. If I see billboards, if I see television and radio ads saying how delicious a certain advertised food will be, that becomes a standard of what it is to be an affluent person, and I might seek that. My children will want it, my spouse will want it, and even I will want it to eat it because it just makes me feel like a person who's on TV or on the radio or on the billboard. So there's many factors that drive food choice. The composition of food is not one of them because we can't see, taste, or smell the composition of food. Instead, we're responding to what things taste like or what we see advertised and so forth. So for many reasons, we overshoot on the animal source foods, the oils and the sweeteners. That's true even for home cooked meals. Way before industrialization of the food system, people did that. But then with industrialized food systems and urbanization, switching to street food and restaurant food, switching to packaged and processed food, that's what leads to the very high levels of sodium, the very high levels of refined grains and added sugar that cause both hypertension and diabetes and unwanted weight gain. Beyond the overshooting on animal source food, sweeteners, and oils, there's this dietary transition towards street food and restaurant food that captures these things that are not characteristic of the home cooked meals. Instead, they're characteristic of the packaged and processed food environment. So calculating these benchmark model diets, this computerized system of calculating millions of diets in every location, the least expensive item for each food group, that tells us like what would be possible to do with the existing food supply chains and the existing income. It tells us what you need to do next. It reveals how powerful the opportunity is to invent and develop and deploy some lower cost ways of getting vegetables, fruits, and so forth. So anyone in food science, anyone in agriculture, if you're thinking about dairy, thinking about aquatic systems and aquatic foods, thinking about better fruit and vegetable storage and distribution and transport, like those are all really important things to get those costs down. Doing that will typically lead to greater sustainability through lower emissions. Anything you can do to raise productivity per unit of input will lower the amount of resources and therefore lower emissions. And decarbonizing is our number one priority in terms of the environment, and we can do that through investing in innovation and technology that lowers the footprint and gets costs down. Of course, activities have external costs. That's a separate thing, and we calculate that and take account of it. But what's overwhelmingly the most biggest driver of emissions is just how much resources are you using? A lot of land or little land? If you have low crop yields per acre, that's a lot of land. That's a lot of land use change. that's a lot of emissions. If you have less milk per cow, that's a lot more methane per cup of milk. So the key point for sustainability, is this idea that you see here. The healthiness of food is not indicated by price. When you go to the grocery store, do not be fooled by advertising. They will try to sell you healthier foods at higher prices. Price is not a guide to nutritional value. In many settings, you just want to look at like what's going on. It's often just displacement of these low-cost healthy options. And so we need to think about how to do this. So I really appreciate, this has been honestly the honor of my life to work on this project. Thanks to the funding from Gates and the UK government, the partnership with FAO and other UN agencies, as well as the World Bank, the engagement with country governments, the collaboration with Erna Herforth, and all of the many collaborators, co-authors on these projects. And if you're interested in this in context, I would hope that you can have a look at the book as well. So thanks again, and I really look forward to the opportunity to talk about this together with you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Masters. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. If you can raise your hand, maybe introduce yourself briefly and make your question as brief as possible. And those online, please feel free to add your questions on chat. So yes, let's get started. Questions? While the room is getting warmed up, I'll ask one myself, Professor Masters. Somebody told me once, I think it was actually the manager of Wegmans, Danny Wegmans, that people are buying, when they buy food here, they're buying convenience more than anything else. And it's in more high-income countries, the difference between buying an unwashed potato versus a frozen cut potato is very different in terms of pricing. As more and more women enter the workplace, they are seeking for convenience more than what is cheapest. Can you comment on that, especially in the context of these middle-income countries that are switching to more women being in the workplace, what the implications are for affordable healthy diet if people are really buying more convenience than calories?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Time use. So this project, is about monetary cost. And time use and time cost is indeed like a central preoccupation. I would just emphasize that it's true even in low-income countries. So even in very low-income countries, we have seen rice and maize then give way to wheat for bread and baked goods, taking away from the previous even lower cost, lower monetary cost starchy staples, which are cassava, millets, and sorghum, or small grains. One of the main drivers of that, in addition to the higher yield of rice, maize, and wheat, which is real and important, it's also true that rice, wheat, and maize have much lower labor cost for women in the household to prepare than the earlier, cheaper starchy staples. So emancipation of women has played an enormous role, even in very low-income countries, through the transition from small grains, millet and sorghum in particular, towards first maize, and then rice, and then wheat in baked goods, even in very low-income countries. And then, as you said, the manager of Wegmans saying, right, well, how about even higher levels of convenience, ready to heat and ready to eat or ready to heat foods, and that of course plays a big role as well. The problem is that measuring time use and cooking cost is incredibly difficult. It's so hard to measure time use. There are Americans who report the number of minutes spent cooking as their primary activity as zero, right? Many Americans report zero, but they are spending some time. It's just microwaving and that sort of thing. So it's just really hard to measure. We're working on it. And you might, some people in the audience, in the class might have ideas about how to think about this problem of time use and convenience. How can we get, nutritional value per dollar, per hour of time work or minute of time work, as well as per dollar of monetary cost?
Great. Thank you. Questions? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for a fascinating talk. I'm Nate Vacanti. I'm a assistant professor of molecular nutrition here. And yeah, my question is, if you were to consider somehow the downstream healthcare costs of an unhealthy diet in this analysis, is that even possible? And what would that do to the disparity between what we actually spend on our diets versus what a healthy diet would cost?
Yeah, no, great question. And the FAO did an effort at that in the 2023 and 2024 State of Food and Agriculture report, SOFA. And you can look at that and see. And then there's a few other papers attempting to add up that external cost, if you will. And it's really big. So in low-income countries, because they have not enough of the more expensive components. And then in high income countries, because we have too much of many things, there's just an enormous health burden. That's absolutely true.
Go ahead.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Bethany, and I'm a undergraduate student in the Department of Global Development. And my question for you was about policy and how you expect policy to change with your new guidelines. As you mentioned, the lowest possible cost of a healthy diet in the US is significantly lower than what's currently being distributed for SNAP. Do you foresee any positive or negative implications of your metric and your numbers on current policies that are in place?
So that's a great question. So our project and my work is squarely focused on the lowest income countries, where we hope and believe that this metric is allowing governments to target nutrition assistance and safety nets, to target investments in agricultural productivity, and also to make public health investments that would lower displacement by regulating, with front of pack labels, and potentially sugar sweetened beverage taxation and other methods to limit the amount of displacement of unhealthy foods. In high income countries, I hope that it helps replace people's intuition about what is healthy with a more evidence-based measure of what is healthy. So if you go to the grocery store or you just walk down the street, you're going to be bombarded with advertisements about healthy stuff. And on your Instagram feed and, in your everyday life, on the computer, if you don't have an ad blocker, you're going to see so many ads for premium healthy products, just like you see ads for premium sustainable products. And almost none of that is true. The healthy items are actually generic, ordinary frozen vegetables, generic, ordinary whole wheat pasta, generic, ordinary fruit. Not organic fruit. You don't have to pay extra for organic. That will not increase your health. It will help local farmers and the neighbors of the organic farm. If you're going to live next to a farm, you want to live next to an organic one, right? And so that's a real thing that organic does, is it helps the neighbors of that farm by reducing the amount of pesticide drift or runoff. And that's a real thing, by the way, right? If you're going to live next to a farm, you want to live next to an organic farm. And that's why organic farms are primarily in affluent locations where neighbors, arrange for that. But in the grocery store, go with the generic. So I hope that does, this new understanding of what a healthy diet actually is, helps to guide both policy through the mechanisms that you asked about and that I just answered, but also maybe some individual choice as well.
Thank you. It's another one, right? Next question. Is it on? Try. Yes. We're just sorting out the microphones. So just give me a second. All right.
Thank you so much for coming in to speak with us. My name is Sanvi. I'm an undergraduate student in the public policy department here at Cornell. And I was wondering, in the context of America, about the idea of food deserts and how oftentimes food prices are kind of skewed by needing to drive for gas and other considerations and bus tickets. And I was wondering how your research might accommodate for things like food deserts in countries like America and others.
Yeah, very important question. So we see very large variation spatially in what's available for sale. This, of course, reflects the efforts of food sellers to meet demand. So there's constant innovation of companies opening up new grocery stores, new format stores, attempting to sell whatever people will buy. And that's true not just for food, of course, but for everything else. And what we see is that in places where people are buying, a low quality diet, sellers are selling a low quality diet because the quantity sold equals the quantity purchased. Now, groceries are a little different because, as you pointed out, people do travel for groceries. So in low income neighborhoods, whether that's a rural part of Africa where all your neighbors have low incomes, or in Boston where I live, right, Mattapan, Dorchester, these neighborhoods where low income people have been, you might say, forced to live by housing costs, and then the legacy of redlining and so forth in American history, the grocery stores in those locations are basically just convenience stores. So here they would be just called like a tropical grocery store, right? It's Guatemalan or Hondurans who own it, or a South Asian grocery store owned by Bangladeshis or Pakistanis, often in Boston, or there would be Brazilian grocery stores and that sort of thing. But then people would take, 2 buses to do their once a week grocery run. And that makes a big difference. It absolutely does. And so when we're looking at prices, we're looking at these averages averaging up over the outlets that people use. And, as you pointed out, for some people, because they're forced by house rents, by apartment rents, to live in a really low rent area where other low income people live, it just isn't profitable to open a grocery store there. And so people are forced to take 2 buses or whatever to get to a grocery store. I mean, the problem is even worse in rural America, where, there are Native American reservations, where it literally takes 3 hours to get to a grocery store.
Professor Masters, thank you very much for your very engaging talk and also for saving us money on buying cheaper but healthier foods. And thank you, the Mira Shaker Family Fund, for making this possible. Let's give him a round of applause. And by the way, attendance today was on these papers. If you haven't signed in your paper, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thanks.
Have a great
Thanks,
afternoon.
Will.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.